Good evening, guys. Welcome to Weekend Warrior Podcast, show number 20. And almost 2 years down the line, here we are still back in action. With me tonight, as usual, Robbie Brink. And I'm going to allow him to introduce our guest for tonight.
Yeah, well, we were talking off air, and very happy to introduce Johann van Loggerenberg. Now, he's an author of a couple of books, and one of them that I recently finished, which was very interesting, Cop Undercover. His life in the shadows with druglords, robbers, and smugglers. Now, in terms of a hook for a book, that sounds like sensationalist undertones, but it's definitely that. A very good written book. Johan was also a member of should we call it the crime intelligence section of the police? As simple as that. And yeah, Johan, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for taking the time to chat to us. Like I've said off air, your book has opened up not a lot, but it's given me a much better insight into the world of crime intelligence and how it works and the technicalities of it and the stress involved with it. Yeah, but welcome to the show.
Thank you, Robbie and Rowan, for the opportunity.
Lekker. Yeah, guys, as usual, thanks for all our partners. Everyday Carry South Africa, Paratus. Please give those guys some support as well. And please remember to like and subscribe. And Johan, I first heard about you. I was walking in the Bargain Books here in our neck of the woods. And I saw your book, and out of pure curiosity, I picked it up. And I popped Grob's a message a while after that. And I said, but we tried to mix up the guests, quite a bit. And I said, I've got this idea. And I came across you, and it took me probably all of about 6 weeks to finally track you down. And I think I finally found you on LinkedIn. And thanks for replying. It's not always that we get replies from people that we invite. But before we get into the details of your of what you did, where did it all start for you? Where did you grow up, go to school? Tell us a little bit about that part of your life.
Okay. Well, it's a lot of it's in this particular book. I should just say this is book number 4. It's in fact a prequel to the other 3 books that I wrote before, in a sense. So I don't want to give too much away because a lot of it's in the book. But in essence, I grew up in Pretoria. As a very young boy, I grew up in what's today known as Centurion, and later I became a boarder at the Afrikaanse Hoërseunskool in high school. My folks got divorced when I was very, very young. So my father lived in Auckland Park in Johannesburg, and yeah, it was the usual thing of the time. You one weekend with the mom and one weekend with the dad, and split holidays, alternatively with both. So that's basically where I come from. And it was in the era, I was born in the year of the moon landing, or the moon walking, should I say, not moon landing, which I believe was also a very good wine year in the Western Cape. Which means that I grew up in the midst and the height of the apartheid era. And so, like many people my age and my skin pigmentation, we grew up completely isolated from the reality of what was going on in the country. Yeah.
One thing that I found really amusing in your book, to the point where I popped Grobby a WhatsApp about it, was you were called up for national service. Was it twice, 3 times, and every time ignoring the instruction to report, and then finally after I don't know how long you decided though it's probably a better idea to join the SAPS. But tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, in those days, I mean, the two of you are probably too young to know this, but effectively, by law, you had to register with the Defence Force when you turned 16, while still at school. And as soon as you finished school, you had to report for duty wherever the call-up papers would send you to at one of the military camps. Or alternatively, you could defer it if you went to university and applied for deferment, which I didn't do. So effectively, when I matriculated, I went on, shall I call it a matric jaw? And, we started in Margate and ended up in Plettenberg Bay. And needless to say, no contact with the folks unless money ran out. And it was in that period where the call-up papers arrived. So I knew nothing of them. And my parents had no means to notify me because in those days there weren't cell phones or anything. So I only came to discover this once my money had run out and I came home. I went to my dad's house first, filthy and unshaven and long hair. And I had to move quick. I had to make a decision, and the decision that I opted for was to rather join the police service, which was an alternative to becoming a soldier. In those days, it wasn't called a service, it was called a force. And so I opted to rather do the 4-year stint in the police because, first of all, I didn't have to be a soldier, which I didn't want to be. Secondly, I thought in my mind I'd be close to home. Thirdly, the money was better than what the soldiers earned. And fourthly, you avoided what they called camps. So if you opted to do your national service in the military, you'd still have to do, I think, 30 days a year camps every year until, I think retirement age, which is not something I wanted to live with for the rest of my life. And so I ended up applying I joined the police and I completed my so-called national service there. And then I waved that pretty much goodbye in a sense. And I started studying part-time while I worked for provincial government for almost 2 years. Yeah.
Johan, but I don't know if you're skipping over it because you don't want to talk about it, or but from what I gather in your book, your time in uniform, you had a bit of a reputation as a hooligan, if I can use that word, and you were sent to Maluskop for how shall we say?
Not trying to give too much of the book away.
Yeah.
But something that really stood out was they had to resuscitate you after an opvolk for being late. For your own, was it being late for your own? Technically, you didn't pass parade because you didn't got the qualification parade. But but where did your heart stop? And how bad was that opvolk to make your heart stop?
Listen, I still have the ECG strips. Can you believe it?
Really?
And I have the medical file. Yeah. Look, in the period of my national service, because I applied late in the year, I could not go into what they call the intake at the then Police College, which is today the Police Academy. And in those instances, you then work at a police station closest to your house, more or less as a skivvy, in helping people that come in and lay complaints and so on. So that meant for 6 months, I more or less did that. And then for the latter half of the year, I did my basic training at the police college. And it is so, it's not, I should say, I did not take national service too serious. I was certainly not paraat, if I can use that Afrikaans term. And it was not an ideological pursuit in my life. In fact, it was an absolute burden. And had I any alternative choice in my own mind and reality, I would not have done it. But that then informed the way in which I approached basic training. I pretty much saw it as a complete nuisance and intrusion in my life. And I think to an extent it translated in the manner in which I related to, the sergeant of the troop, the captain of the building, and the majority of the people in that system that provided basic training. So when I arrived for basic training, I had fairly long hair. I just spent a week in Durban on the beach. I didn't arrive on the day everybody else did. Everybody else had already had their classic haircuts. They were already in their uniforms that had been issued to them.
And so you were drawing all the attention, yeah.
Oh, no, I stood out like a sore thumb. In fact, I still remember what I wore that day. And I had a huge suitcase that was that had very little clothing in it, and it was stacked with food and alcoholic beverages and things. I remember the day I arrived was in the afternoon, so most of the people were either in class or physical training. And they took me to the building. Those buildings are 3 floors high, and I was on the last building at the top of the hill to the left on the top floor. And there are 36 bed there were 36 beds per troop. And there was one last bed towards the end, which had been allocated to me. And my suitcase had little wheels. And it was quite heavy, I should say. And what I didn't know was that you weren't allowed to walk in what was called the middle gangetjie, which is the aisle between the beds facing each other. You actually had to walk along the side. The middle gangetjie was reserved for the sergeant who would conduct inspections in the morning. So I dragged this heavy suitcase from one end of the middle gangetjie to the other end, running deep trails into the highly polished floors. And that, of course, didn't endear me to anybody. But, it was because I didn't arrive in the normal sense like everybody else that I didn't know these things. So it was completely unintentional. But I was a bit, I should say, a bit naffy. And the net effect was, it culminated in one of these PT sessions where I should say I didn't physically prepare for the basic training. It wasn't as fit this guy there, and I think it stretched me beyond my physical capacity at the time. And true enough, my heart stopped. And as I say, I still have my medical file from those days, and it's got a long ECG strip
with a flat line on it. That's fantastic. But now I assume
With actually a few flat lines, not just one. Yeah.
so I assume opfoks were a thing of the past for you. You got a little bit of reprieve in the future from then on, right?
No. Look, I think if I recall correctly, I spent about a week in hospital, which was on site. I still have the hospital rules that you had to sign. To give you a sense of the mentality, the hospital rules would be things like you're not allowed to speak to the black staff. You're also not allowed to ask them to go and buy you things at the canteen, etc., etc., which of course meant I did exactly that. So, but you know, that sort of sums up the vibe for me in the place. The sergeant and I did not get along well at all. He gave me the nickname Gesiggie. It's not in the book, but I was the guy who had to clean the bathroom and the toilets, which is normally the work reserved for the person least favorable in a given week. I pretty much did it for the entire 6 months of basic training. Yeah, I think that. But look,
Let's call it. At least it was character building. Yeah.
Yeah, look,
Johan?
I should say, you know, after the hospital, I was back in the thing, and you know, by the end of basic training, I was very, very fit. I remember doing a marathon in December of that year, and I came second in that marathon. The only
Wow.
person that beat me was a member of the special task force. And I actually stopped a few times along the road just to have a cigarette. So I was really, really very. I think it was from all the Opfok sessions, of which I had many. Yeah.
That's precisely, Johan. If you have more stories like that, that's what we want to hear. That's precious. It's not even precious. That's very cool. It reminds me, I've done a couple of 94.7 bicycle races, and I tended to stay very long at the Porsche. The Porsche stand had halfway carbo load beer sessions there, and I ended up staying there quite often for too long as well. So it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Smoked breaks and still came second.
Johan, do you think that a kind of rebellious streak and almost refusing to play along to the rules set you up for what happened later, you know, when you went undercover? Because it's an unconventional way of thinking and acting. That, I mean, surely if you were the high and tight, short back and sides type, it would stand out like a sore thumb, you know, in the criminal, what shall we call this, underworld. I mean, but this way, you know, your way of being rebellious and not always conforming to the rules and regulations, surely that would have played a huge part in your career later on.
I don't know. It's hard to say. I'm not going to try and psychoanalyze myself beyond what I've done in the book. I should say this. I imagine what you refer to as a rebellious streak was partly informed by, I guess, a kind of like an arrogance that comes from the school that I went to. You have a certain level of pride if you come from that particular school. The fact that I was a boarder meant that staying in a dormitory with 36 other people and sharing bathrooms and things were not funny to me, or dinner time or breakfasts or whatever, or ironing your own clothes and that stuff I had been doing before. So all of that was pretty much normal for me. I think it was more a case of just me wanting to make the best of a situation that I found myself in that I didn't really want to be in. Which meant if there were weekends that I could sneak out with my mates and go to Limelight or Jacqueline's and try my luck there with, that was the kind of mentality I had. It was less rebellious. I mean, it's not as if I was more rebellious than the ordinary person with the kind of attitude that I had. It's just that, I was more liberal in my thinking, and I understood where these sort of systems of the day could be pushed, and I try to make the time as memorable and enjoyable to myself as humanly possible.
You want to
just hold on. So I think we jumped a little bit now. So Johan, just a quick summary. So you finished basic training, then you went where? They sent you to Malioskop to be a riot control.
Yeah, look, most people were posted to where they wanted to go, but there were these terrible riots going on in the country at the time. It was the very late 80s. I'm now talking about 1988, 89. And inevitably, some people had to be sent to what they called afgedeelde dienste. And I was, you don't have a say in that. Your sergeant actually selects 3 or 4 people per troop. And it's like drawing the short straw. And so you just get informed. You're one of those bad luck guys who's going to go on this. So when everybody completed their ceremonial passing out parade, I was one of the few people who had to go to Malioskop for what they called counter-insurgency training, the COIN, which I think, if I remember correctly, was a 6 weeks course. Yeah. And then from there, they posted us straight to, at that time, Pietermaritzburg in what's now known as KwaZulu-Natal, then still known as Natal.
Natal, yeah.
And it was a torrid time, I tell you. It was just very traumatic for me. I mean, I was a kid. I was a child.
Yeah, so some of the, and it's not that you go really into depth about that specific period, but yeah, some of it, I think people underestimate the level of violence that you guys went through, and the stuff that happened, especially in Natal. That was pre-election time, so it must have been quite rough.
Look, I should say this. It's not as if I was given huge responsibilities. In fact, I did a lot of jobs in that. It was for about a year and a half that I had to do those duties. In that period, I was anything from chef to admin worker to driver to manning a mobile police station to a heavy duty vehicle driver. I at a point I worked in the garage where I handled ordering tires and making sure the vehicles were serviced, and gate guard. Gate guarding was something I did frequently.
Oh.
So it's not as if I was how shall I say, one of the gung ho type in the middle of the action, so to speak. Where I had to shoot at people shot at me, or whatever the case might be. But there certainly were instances, and this literally from day one. I remember the first scene that I attended where it was a burnt out makeshift creche where I had to help carry out bodies of little babies, you know. And this was in the era where the IFP and the UDF were at loggerheads, and of course the apartheid government assisted this, you know, the strife at the time. And we know that now, but at the time, you know, what was projected was that the IFP were the good people and the UDF were the bad people. They were actually the terrorists and the communists hiding behind the name. So yeah, it was not a good period for me in my formation years as a young adult. Severe trauma, which I had to deal with much later on in my life. But thankfully, you know, I can say it was not as bad as I think it was for other people. Yeah.
Now, one of the questions, and we sort of discussed this just before that. So obviously, not long after that, you got went into the what was it? The OICS. That was your first proper posting in the crime intelligence arena, right?
No, Robbie, I finished my national service first. I completed
yeah. And then spent 2 years working at the bar and studying part-time as well. What were you studying, just for interest sake?
BCom.
Oh.
Johan, but if I remember, please correct me from the book. You were recruited back, if I remember the book correctly, to join this unit, correct?
Yes. So after I finished my my national service, I got a full-time job, which I consider to be my first job, at the provincial administration in the roads department in Pietermaritzburg. And later on, I moved across to what was then still known as Transvaal, now Gauteng, and I was based in Pretoria, also in the roads department. And during that period, I, on a part-time basis, assisted what was known as the Goldstone Commission. And the Goldstone Commission was effectively tasked to conduct an inquiry, very much like Judge Zondo is doing at the moment into state capture. Judge Goldstone was required to conduct an investigation into activities of fomenting violence and the apartheid regime and dirty tricks and so on. So the connection between my going into the organized crime intelligence unit came about because of that relationship. When my role ended, assisting a specific small team that was part of the Goldstone Commission, the one person that I knew suggested that I should speak to the guys. I should speak to these guys and explore the possibility of perhaps joining this new concept, which had just come about. And they had all sorts of ideas on how to address organized crime. Bear in mind, Rowan and Robbie, this is now 1993, towards the end. The winds of change are blowing. The elections are coming up. The Transitional Executive Council is running the country. It's no longer the Nationalist Party. And the mindset, I think, was forward-looking. And so the detective service within the police at the time created this small component called the Organized Crime Intelligence Project initially, later to become a unit, which was solely intended on anticipating opening up the borders of the country, and the fact that organized crime was going to mushroom. And it was a world trend at that point for law enforcement agencies to invest into a concept like that. So South Africa started doing that, and yeah, I met the guys. They shared one concept with me, which was the idea of a long-term deep cover crime intelligence agent with a view to infiltrate organized crime over a very, very long period. And technically, in the plan of the time, the idea was to really only surface me into normality again around about now, at my age, now,
Wow.
today.
Was that planned for so long? Really?
Yeah, that was the idea. It was the concept.
Oh.
And the concept was based on, case studies from world over. The idea was that because I was very young, I mean, at that time, I think I was 22, 23. The idea was to mimic the growth of bona fide, real organized crime crooks of that era that would grow, and you grow alongside them, so that when things mature, you surface the agent, and then I can testify against them. That was, in essence, the concept. At the time, it sounded exciting to me. It sounded like something I thought I would be able to give a try. Yeah, it sounded adventurous. And so I said, "Oh yeah, let's give it a bash."
Did you? No, like I would have loved to have been there. Just did you discuss any of this with a mentor, or was this you and the senior guys getting up to this plan and saying, all right, this sounds like a good idea? I would have loved to have been at that conversations of looking at the ramifications of all this. It must have been very interesting to plan it, right?
Well, look, it was an experimental concept. So, I mean, it was always open-ended. It wasn't cast in stone, but I described to you at least the conceptual thinking of the time. The distinction was made between long-term deep cover police agents and then what they called shallow cover agents, which now there were some precedents. Around that time, they surfaced what was probably, I think, the first, second, or third project in that concept, which was focused on the Boer Mafia. And they had just surfaced the deep cover agent there. If I recall correctly, his name was Pierre Erasmus. He would later go on to head the unit that looked at combating organized crime in endangered species and CITES. He had infiltrated the Boer Mafia, which was a group of people predominantly based in Pretoria who generated income through criminality in an organized, syndicated fashion to fund right-wing activities. And they kind of overlapped with what was known as the Curry Mafia. They were based predominantly in KwaZulu-Natal, mainly involved in motorcar theft and hijackings. And he had just surfaced at that point in time and began to testify against lots and lots of people that he had infiltrated and collected evidence on. So there was a recognition that crime syndicates would become aware of this methodology, and you had to sort of compensate for it with longer term plans and concepts.
Yeah, they'll be afraid of newcomers, yeah.
Well, they could see now that this was happening. So you had to be smarter in infiltrating them than just one way.
Yeah.
Johan. So if you take just a quick step back, I mean, if in your book you mentioned they were at the end of the day they were more than one of what people that did what you did,
Yes.
and surely what were they kind of looking for in the people that were recruited? I mean, what there would have surely have been some characteristics that stood out, or out of all of you. I would assume people that have unmarried, highly intelligent, etc., etc., and also, I mean, you can't just, I would assume, send a guy into something like this blindly. What kind of training did you get beforehand?
That was one of my questions. What was, like, I know in hindsight you said this, the psychological impact was immense, but the beforehand training, never mind your own psychological well-being, but understanding human psychology, working how to manage people and how to lie and how to keep your lie straight. Did you guys get a lot of in-depth training for that?
No, I received no training for it. I should say, I think in my case, it's difficult for me to speak of others because I actually don't know. I think the unmarried would have been one of the benefits because it's simpler to extract yourself from an environment. I guess in my case, because I was so young, I didn't have a long life record that left lots of footprints. I'm not so sure about the intelligent, Ron.
That's what all smart people say, Johan.
No, I say this in hindsight. If I had to, if I had to make that choice now, knowing what I know, I certainly would not have opted for that. I think we may just have lost Rowan there, but anyway.
I think he'll probably recollect. No, look, I'll probably, if I had to comment one thing, I would say as young men, we probably tend to feel, like you said, if it's adventurous and you feel bulletproof, and how many things have we gotten up to because right at that moment in time we thought it was a good idea. If you go sit down and think about your decision making at that specific point in time, I think sometimes we'd actually understand how stupid we are. But like you said, adventure and the exuberance of youth, like being bulletproof, man, it seems like a challenge, and also it's brand new. You get a lot of freedom. I think it's got a lot of appealing elements to it. But like I mentioned, it's that, yes, if you had to think about all the ramifications to it, and like you said, if the planning was for it to be such long term, yes, that's a massive undertaking. That's like you said, even experimental. The moment you guys pull the trigger and say, okay, we're going forward with this, it must have been quite a daunting journey to start.
Yeah, look, Robbie, I'd say this in response. Firstly, I was one of the people who felt at that young age optimistic about the future of our country, because I knew what the living conditions were for the majority of people in this country. I had been politically and ideologically educated in the years prior, when I was a very young adult, through somebody I met, and you meet him in the book. So I was not naive to where the country was completely and what it could be going forward. So firstly, I saw this opportunity within that context. Secondly, I have an element of altruism in my nature. It comes from as young as a little boy. So there's something in me that wants to help, and not just the next door neighbor. I'd like to help the neighborhood for whatever reason. Thirdly, there is the adventurous element and so on, but there's also the attraction to the concept, which is it's interesting. There's an intellectual element to it. And then lastly, I would just say the topic interested me because the bulk of my national service era, I actually spent at the South African Narcotics Bureau. So I had a history in, let's call it short-term, quick stings, undercover deals, carrying cases through court dockets, and I had a few interesting cases that I'd worked on. So I did have a level of contextual background and training, if you like, in the real sense of doing buys or how exactly people export or import drugs, what different types of drugs, and so forth. So it's a combination of those factors that I think, by and large, influenced my decision to do it. Combined then, of course, with the introduction, which was completely coincidental, and based on this person's observation of me over a period of 2 years, dealing with very bad people from the old regime, and in some instances, managing to convince them to spill the beans and even cooperate and even turn state witness. So
Johan?
that guy just saw something in me, I suppose, that said, look, I think you should try this because you
Make
have
a
that.
difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Johan, so all things said and done, and right, they without ruining the book, because people need to read the book. It's phenomenal, but so guys, read the book. I'll put a link
So
on it. I'll go read the book, but I'm going to ask a question.
I'll go off on a tangent quickly, Rowan. Hold on, guys.
Yes.
Read the book.
It's yeah.
I chatted to you on beforehand, books, his writing style, the story, how it was laid out, how it was presented, and the factual elements and the learning. Dude, it's amazing. Johan, a fantastic book.
It reads like I'm a huge Tom Clancy fan, and it reads like the best spy novel. It's absolutely fantastic. Go and read the book. But what I wanted to ask them, so now they tell you, okay, done, sorted, all right, you are now officially known as Agent RS536, and day one on the job. How the hell do you start? I mean, and that's something that I've been contemplating after I've read the book. I mean, just kind of, if I take let's say for the sake of the argument, you would take me or Grobs, all right? You're now this undercover agent, and you now need to establish this alias. I'm not going to spoil the name because go and read the book, but you need to now establish this person in this world that you only have a glimpse of, and how do you start gaining that trust and that getting the name out there without doing something really stupid? What do you physically do to start off with?
As little as possible. You start studying the patterns and the behavior of the people that you are investigating. You start being at the right place at the right time, and you downplay. In other words, you don't pretend to be something you're not. I should say my first couple of, I think about a month or two, I actually spent translating and translating the manual from Afrikaans to English. So I actually did an admin job for about a month. And then I took the plane with my bags, and off I went and arrived at my destination. And in a sense, I think I describe my first few days in the book. It's about deciding where you're going to live, deciding how you're going to eat, what's going to be your projected means of surviving on a daily basis. So, what should people see you as doing for a living? Making money, being able to buy food, or are you going to drive a car, and if so, what car? So, in my case, when I say slow and downplay, I did not suddenly appear and live in a fancy flat or fancy lodging. I went and lived in a boarding establishment.
Yeah,
I
make
did
a
not
name
have
for yourself. Yeah.
I did not have a car. I used the bus or the taxi or whatever the case might be. And you kind of mimic life, in much the same way. If you can think of any big gangster today in South Africa and you backtrack how they came from nowhere to where they are today, you want to mimic that. So I'm not prepared to give up a name, yeah, but if you guys want to give me a name, we can use it as a case study and I'll explain it to you. But once upon a time, Mr. X, who is today the leader of a gang, was 23 years old and he was a nobody. He probably lived somewhere in a meager lodging. He probably didn't have a car. He didn't have jewelry. He didn't have money.
He had to fight his way up. Yeah.
And then slowly over time, he began to connect and wheel and deal and broaden his network, and his lifestyle grew comparatively with that. He had his run ins with the law, whatever the case might be. And it's exactly that I mimicked. So, in fact, the truth is, you try not to lie, Robbie. I always made this point in afterwards when I trained some of the new potential agents. Is the minute you have to lie, you're probably trying too hard. You should try and stick as close to what you are as possible and make it real.
I loved your strategy on the what was it, Johan Smith. And sorry, this is again giving away something of the book, but it was lovely how you you sat him down, had him tell you the story, then took 7 or 8 hours to tell the story. Once the story's done, okay, you're going to tell it to me again. I'm going to write it down, and then once I've written it down, let's talk about the discrepancies. And it was amazing. It's like it makes a lot of sense. And like you said, you probably, the less you lie, the closer it's to the truth, the less you have to remember. But no, it's phenomenal. It's like I say, there's a lot of checks and balances that I don't think it's used. And this is my next question. And with the stuff that's been happening the last couple of weeks, and you being involved at quite a high level, would you say that crime intelligence right now is failing? I would, as a nobody, have very little insight, but it seems to me quite outright that there's not enough skilled guys like you left to either pass down and get training for the new generation, or people just aren't doing their work. Do you have, what's your point of view about that?
Robbie, I don't think like most things in life, the answer is never one thing. We should remember, first of all, where we come from. So this country has a context that must always take into account the consequences of the pre-colonialism era, the colonialism era, the apartheid era, that period from the early 90s into the early 2000s, which I call the honeymoon years, where there was a lot of kumbaya because of political freedom, but little else changed. And then sort of reality began to kick in, and then came the state capture years. So within that broad context, and it's not as if we've ever had a perfect crime intelligence capacity. The crime intelligence capacity that existed in the 80s and the years before was engineered and designed and intended to suppress people. It was not a true crime intelligence capacity. In those honeymoon years, we certainly built things that had a lot of good prospects, but they weren't perfect. These were the years of the Scorpions and the beginning of the asset forfeiture unit as we know it today, and the SIU, and lots of law enforcement components. But I'm sad to say that in many instances where bathwater had to be thrown out, babies were thrown out with the bathwater. And so the net effect of that is that we have, in my view, a broken component within our police that needs some serious rethinking and redesign and modernization. And the sooner they start sorting out their nonsense that we read about almost on a weekly basis, the better, because it's not about them. It's about people in this country and future generations. And we don't need to reinvent the wheel. This is not rocket science, but it's certainly science. And I should just say, I think that the primary thing that concerns me is that the intelligence environment in the state, in my own experience, tends to attract a certain type of personality, a certain type of character, which is fine for certain jobs. But I think you also need to look for a broader base of personalities that are more scientific, more analytical, and smarter, and that sees crime intelligence as it's intended to be, which is actually a lot less spying and James Bond stuff and a lot more about understanding, using your agents and your informants and your tradecraft to develop and understand things and anticipate them and plan how you're going to address the risk. I'm sure there are very, very good people in crime intelligence, but if the system is broken, then you're not going to have the kind of support that I did as a youngster in my 20s. The type of people I worked with were absolute professionals with many, many, many years of experience of taking cases through high court, where they had to testify for weeks on end, complicated fiscal investigations, drugs, firearms, and so forth. They were professionals in what they did. They were patient.
And a lot less glamorous than what I think people would assume it to be.
There's no glamour. In fact, if there's glamour, you're probably not doing your job right.
You're doing it wrong.
It's hard. It's really hard work, and it takes a lot of planning. There's a lot of, if in doubt, don't do it. It's a lot of admin. You've got to.
That's what I wanted to comment. Something that was really interesting to me is that if it's never mind the moral level that you had to apply in doing, rather walk away if it doesn't fit, but then the admin level, yes, you guys, that it must have been a mountain of work just to get the admin right.
Yeah, no, I mean that's how when I say system, one element of that requires you to do proper record keeping, but it also requires you to get prior authority. So, I mean, this isn't just you going off and playing criminal. You have to obtain the necessary authority in advance for every single activity that could potentially be seen as promoting a crime, advancing a crime, or investigating a crime. And so, you see, in my book, I do comment on it towards the end on what I consider to be areas that caused some slippage. And I think that slippage continued. And that's why we are where we are. I think, so it's a long answer. It's not all the answers. I'm not suggesting the solutions, other than to say it's a difficult job, it's a tricky job, but it's not something we have to reinvent. This methodology is being applied worldwide.
Johan, so if you from an operational perspective, I mean, now you're in the thick of it, and you're doing these transactions, these drug buys, for to use plain English, and it's obviously sanctioned by by the SAPS and whatnot. And now I'm putting on my movie, I think a lot of time when we think of a cop undercover, we're thinking Miami Vice. It's and when like you're laughing because the reality is obviously something very different. But now you're dealing in these substances, and you're buying and you're selling and you're playing broker and you're doing your
you can't sell. You cannot sell.
Yeah. Okay. So you're buying, but there must have been. Now you're dealing with some of the worst that there is in the worst people that's out there, and surely there must have been some moments where you thought to yourself, it's like you are no second cock. I mean, this now it's a problem, and it's and your little hair stand on end, and you feel that adrenaline dump in your stomach, and now it's it's going pear-shaped really fast, really quickly. I mean, are you willing to share? I know there was a bunch of bank robbers that you got caught up with, but please give us an anecdote or two.
Yeah, it's like the book, and this is not giving anything away of the book, but the book sort of downplayed how I think actually how dangerous it was. The real dangers involved in doing what you were doing. And I think you did it on purpose because it doesn't seem like you're that type of person. It's almost like you don't have that that bravado or that been there, done that type of mentality. It was a job to be done, but it must have been much more dangerous than what the book portrayed.
Look, I mean, of course, there were hairy moments. I relate 2 or 3 in the book. I think the one is I don't want to give the storyline away, but you kind of, if you've read the book, you'll know which incident I think for me was certainly most traumatic. And I really thought, there things might go very pear-shaped. I guess I'd say the most dangerous people I probably met, and would have been the Stachy brothers, Rashid and Rasad. And yeah, look, these days people prefer punchy books that are about 100,000 words or less. The original manuscript was over 600,000 pages. So, words, 600,000 words. So you're reading about a sixth of what I could say. Yeah, there were moments, but there's nothing that jumps to mind that would have been worse than what I put in the book. The trick is always I think you should not find yourself in such situations. But I'm not taking away from, if I'm going to infiltrate one of these Western Cape gangs or the taxi gangs or whatever, I think your life's absolutely in danger. And my life was in danger. But if you plan well and you think it through well and you work in a scientific way, then you limit the risk, certainly.
One thing that I found very, very interesting in your book, and you touched on it very, very, very briefly, but if you can maybe elaborate on it a little bit, is, you're very deep undercover, and the amount of people who know who you are is severely limited.
Yeah.
And what was interesting was you were doing your thing, and you appeared on the radar of law enforcement, conventional law enforcement. Let's call it that. And how is that managed? For a guy like me, I'm just thinking, if you got, did you have some consolation in the back of your mind that should you be picked up in a conventional operation or arrested or during a bust or whatever, you're going to make a phone call and they're going to come pick you up and everything's going to be hunky-dory? Or is it very much a sit down, shut up and let the thing play out so you can maintain your cover? It must be a very delicate balance to manage.
Yeah, you plan for that. You plan for it, and then you see how far it goes. But look, it's inevitable that you're going to draw the attention of other police, and you have to keep the cover. It's just the way the job works. You can't make that call. Certainly not if you spend that kind of period, those number of years that I have, because you mess it up.
Yeah.
So you got to wing. You wing it,
Would you go back? Would you go back if they said come and help rebuild and train and sort us out and let's?
No, I'm happy to sit with them like we sitting and go into greater detail over a coffee. And but I certainly won't go back. No, I've done my bit.
You've written multiple books, and I've got them on my little list, and we'll definitely share some links. But afterwards,
You're welcome to call me again.
Be careful what you wish for, nah? But then you've afterwards you've touched on some big names in the South African criminal community. Big names, and it was very much in a different capacity. But one thing, a question that I like to ask our guests, and I asked all of them the same one, but just in a different context, is if the public has a certain perception of criminals and the work that you do and the kind of the people that you're dealing with, and what is some of the biggest kind of misconceptions or myths that the public have over the criminal in South Africa, that you think is people are just making they just have no idea what we're really dealing with?
I'd say that it's not an us and them situation. Criminals are among us. They have kids in school with your kids. They go to the same restaurants as you go. There's no us and them. They're among us. That's the biggest mistake I think people make. They are as ordinary as they are extraordinary. They are entrepreneurs. Some are successful, some not. The only fundamental difference is they've got no respect for law.
That's something you touched on the book, and that was also quite interesting, is that it seems that the criminal organizations they don't mind. Doesn't matter what their, let's call it, ideological standpoint is, or their loyalty, or it doesn't matter. They didn't mind working together as long as it was for a common purpose. In most cases, making money. That was quite interesting to read.
It's always money.
Mm.
Syndicated crime is about money. It's a business.
Do you think a lot of these guys, obviously, if you become a very successful crime lord, to use a very loose term, but let's call it that. I mean, obviously, that can't be a moron. You need to be a pretty sharp, intelligent individual. Do you think a lot of these guys, if they just applied their minds in a
Legal direction,
they would have been equally successful?
That's why you should read some of my other books. I actually make the point in, I think, the book called Death and Taxes. A lot of these people, if circumstances were different for them, would have been very, very successful business people contributing towards the benefit of society.
Yeah, it's definitely on my list. I'm interested in the rogue wars, the rogue unit at SARS, and the tobacco wars that you've written about. So I think we're going to have you back for a light couple of discussions on those as well. It was Johan, like I said, it's not that I am totally oblivious to what happens in terms of crime intelligence, but you actually opened up the door a little bit to say how things work. And I had some questions previously, but no, it was well written, a good insight. And something that you touched on is that, are you doing fine now? Are you happy now? I know it's something. Let's say it. Was it worth it? Do you feel your altruism was worth your commitment and the time spent and the injuries that you sustained from this?
Look, I mean, my life is my life. I'm philosophical about that. It is what it is. I don't relive my life in alternate universes. I'm grateful for all the opportunities. I'm grateful for everything I've learned and seen. I'm grateful for every blessing I've had. I'm far better off than the majority of our fellow citizens. We're entering a different era. Information age, fourth industrial revolution. My life's been full. I'm privileged. You read about my 20s. Wait until you read about my 30s and my 40s. Happy is also a relative term. What does that mean? How long is a piece of string? What I can say is that I recognize my privilege. I recognize my life has been full. I'm embarking on a new era in my life, which is I've been building on a business since 2016. COVID hasn't helped any of us. I'm not special. I'm not different to you or anybody else. And I would still like to participate in making the world a better place for everybody. And I think, my wish is, if I had a magic wand, is that we all do that, and that we do so in a measured way, even if it's in the smallest way, by like the three of us chatting, that we raise these things and that we leave the thought with each other is, what are you going to do tomorrow, and what am I going to do tomorrow that could potentially contribute towards a better South Africa for all. And it can be anything, it's that moment where you stop and speak to the guy selling something at the traffic light, as opposed to ignoring him and looking away. I'm not saying buy something. I'm just saying the way in which we relate with people. So, yeah, I am where I am in life. I would not have it any different. I don't regret so much anything. I've learned from things, and where I've made mistakes, I've learned from them. I just hope I haven't harmed people, you know.
Johan, that's probably all what we can like really aspire to. Like live your life and don't harm people. That's simple as that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm like I said, I'm gonna smash those 3 books. We're gonna probably have a couple more discussions. Johan, really interesting stuff. There's a lot of stuff that we'd like to touch in terms of our conversation here. But let me put it this way. Guys, go read the book. Really, it's highly recommended. The jury is still out on the other 3 books, but we'll report back quite soon. Johan, I think I smashed your book in an evening.
Thank you very much.
I had some. I was a little bit tired the next day. It was a one-sitting book. Very well written. Thanks for the insight. Thanks for your service. Yeah.
Yeah, Johan, from our side, thank you very much. I would love to have it back. I have about another 5 or 6 questions here that we haven't even touched on, but thinking about some of the other books that you've written, I actually think it's better that we keep it for that, because one thing that I kind of just made the connection now is you talk about a certain motorcycle gang in one of your books. And I picked up certain cues about that in a different book, about a certain infamous character from the West Rand. That, and all of a sudden, that kind of the connections about in the underworld and how these guys operate, and what Grobby mentioned earlier. So there's definitely more stuff that we would like to touch on. So, from our side, thank you. It's not often, we invite 10 guys and 2 people reply to come on the show. And you didn't hesitate, and you constantly, we were talking offline and replying. And, it's lekker that guests are involved from the very beginning. And thank you from our side.
Yeah, but again,
thank you for the opportunity.
We've touched so little, especially this relating to the book. But again, we don't want to give too much of the book away. It's I can't wait for you to come down to the garden route so we can have a proper braai and a couple of whiskeys. Yeah.
Guys, Johan, I'm going to ask you to stay on while we close off. Guys, just thank you to all our usual supporters. I'm going to ask every guys, please like and subscribe. And paratus.info, Gideon and his guys always sharing. Mornay, Els, Gareth Robb from Everyday Carry South Africa always sharing, liking, allowing us to punt the show there. The guys from Military and Industry News on Facebook always sharing on their side. It makes our jobs much easier if we have support from some of our friends. So guys, thank you very much for that. And then, that's it from our side. We'll see you guys again in about 2 weeks' time with the son of infamous mercenary Mike Orr.
Mad Mike Orr, yeah.
Yeah, Mad Mike Orr. We've got his son on the show in 2 weeks' time. And we're on from our side. Thank you. And then we'll speak quickly offline. And have a lucky evening, guys.
Cheers.